Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food? To disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims. Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth, bro. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Hello, I'm Paul Sheehan.
I'm Scott Maddox.
I'm director and producer of this show, and this is one of our hosts, obviously.
Welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. Today we're going to be talking about skepticism of history and myths and lots of different topics spanning all of human history about, things that a lot of times we were told were true and may not be true, and why it's important to look into these things if you get a chance.
You should find the time. It's important. And one of the reasons it's important to me is that all throughout human history, we've had people go to war over things like religion. We've had culture wars that are being fought. In fact, some of them going on right now in this country that are based on half-truths and disinformation. And on today's show, we're going to examine a number of historical figures and kind of deconstruct some of the myths built around them. And it's important because the world that we live in is defined in large part by myths. Some of the examples of the people we're talking about are people like Martin Luther. We're going to be discussing about Christopher Columbus. And we're going to be discussing about things like memes and how they have also affected popular culture and misinformation, disinformation, etc. So Scott, what is one of the individuals you'd like to talk about first? Got to jump in on this.
Well, first I'd like to talk about a personal anecdote that I have where, I'm a certified public accountant, so occasionally I'll attend training events. And this particular one I attended once was done by the Maryland Association of Certified Public Accountants, and yeah, I'm calling them out. And the president, and I think he's still president of this, he gave this anecdote, and it was like a nice story, and I was like sitting there thinking like, is that too good to be true? And it was a story about Oxford College in England, and they had like this great hall, like, he's describing it. It's got like these big wooden beams in the ceiling, and I'm just like imagining like Hogwarts dining hall, because like it was around when like Harry Potter was big and stuff. And they're saying like, well, Oxford College is very old, and so like eventually they had to like repair and replace the ceiling and the roof, and they've got these great big like wooden beams in the ceiling, and they're like, well, where are we gonna find the same wood to like go in there? And like sure enough, they found some old document that said like, oh, there's this forest over here that we planted, and chop down the trees and use those. And they're like, wow, that's like foresight, that they were smart enough to like plant all these trees and have them ready for use 500 years later. So when I got home from the training, I Googled it, and sure enough, not true at all. And even on like Oxford College's website, they have a page dedicated to debunking this story, because this story is actually like so widespread that like many motivational speakers and other people have told this story multiple times, and you can understand why, because it's like, they're trying to tell people about like, be prepared for the future, have foresight, think about, beyond your own life, and you could use this story for like any number of things, from like protecting the environment, you know, for future generations, or, you know, just being ready 20 years down the line or something like that. The problem is, it's just not true. It's a nice story, but it's not true.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, which is that a lot of people will try to use these myths to propagate a position of progressive or whatever ideology they're driving.
You use it for a lot of different things.
For a lot of different things, but it's also been used. Myths are also used to rewrite history, to kind of change how certain historical figures are seen. You know, for instance, Columbus. You know, if anybody knows about Columbus, who say in their 40s, you know, they grew up and he was a national hero. You never question this. You got a holiday off. You know, we would draw the little boats, the Ninta, Pinta, Santa Maria. You know, we would show like Columbus. We'd draw little cartoons with crayons of Columbus exchanging bread with the Indians, and you come to find out that Columbus was a monster on a level that is probably, I think, only you could equate to someone like Hitler.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm going to substantiate that here shortly. So the question is, how does somebody that is that awful of a human being go from that to almost having a sainthood, where we put them on a stamp? And how does that history get buried? And why? And why is we as humans are so quick to wrap mythology around something in order to propagate our own personal biases or our own agendas?
Well, glad you asked that. So pretty much the modern conception of who Columbus is, or I don't want to say modern, but the popular belief that Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean in 1492, sailed the ocean blue, discovered America or whatever, that's based off of a history that the author William Blake wrote. And I visited Spain once, and I think it was in Sevilla, or no, wait, that was Columbus. But I think it was the Charles V castle, where there's a room inside, and that's where like William Blake was hanging out for a while. And he was like, that's where he supposedly wrote this history about Columbus. So he was kind of like a minor character in history, I guess, and he wrote all this extra stuff about it, and it popularized him. And then later, you know, it just morphed into this thing where it became popular for Italian immigrants in America that were heavily discriminated against. You know, every new immigrant in America was being discriminated against. You know, it's like the Irish, and then the Italians, African slaves, Muslims, people from Arab countries, anywhere. America is very big on discrimination, unfortunately. But Columbus seemed to be used as a way to be like, hey, we're actually Americans after all. We discovered America. You know, you owe us, kind of thing. And so
it served a purpose.
Yeah, or that's the purpose that they were trying to use it. And it did become enmeshed in American culture to the extent that we now have a a federal holiday dedicated to Columbus Day recognition. And also, you know, there's I would say that he's a Catholic hero. You know, I went to Seville, Spain, and they had Columbus's tomb. I don't know if he's actually in there, but they have it there. It's recognized, you know. He's pretty close to a saint if he isn't already.
Which is weird, because the Catholic Church, his behavior was so bad that the Catholic Church actually had to condemn him in his lifetime and put restraints on him. Las Casas was a person who wrote that he first came to Hispaniola, and Hispaniola, for those who you are not aware, is what is currently Haiti and the Dominican Republic. It was founded by Columbus. He went there in 1508, and he said there was approximately 60,000 living natives on this island. So that from 1494 to 1508, over 3 million people had perished from war, slavery, and the mines. These were slaves that were brought in, as well as the indigenous people that were on the island. And he writes, who in future generations would believe this? It seems so unbelievable in their own time. To give some further understanding of this, according to historian Gonzalo Ferdinand Diovo, by 1548, 56 years after Columbus landed on Hispaniola, there were only about 500 of the native people left on the island. So essentially, Columbus exterminated the entire indigenous population. His soldiers were killed and enslaved with impunity, literally everyone on the island. When Columbus fell ill in 1495, what little restraint he had maintained over his men disappeared. And as he went through a lengthy period of recuperation, the troops went wild, stealing, killing, raping, and torturing natives, trying to force them to divulge the whereabouts of imagined treasures of houses of gold. It was during this period that about 50,000 of the natives were killed. Upon his recovery, Columbus reorganized his troops' efforts and started forming squads of several hundred heavily armed men and more than 20 attack dogs. The men tore across the island, killing thousands more of sick and unarmed natives. Soldiers would use their captives for sword practice, attempting to decapitate them or cut them in half with a single blow. Historian Howard Zinn writes that Columbus spearheaded a massive slave trade. In 1495, his men captured in a single raid 1,500 men, women, and children. When he shipped 500 of the slaves to Spain, 40% died en route. So this is one of the things that we are going to talk about a little more when we come back from our break. But we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll discuss a little more about Columbus and the myth around him and some of the disinformation. And how is it that people are hearing about this had no idea this was going on?
Right.
When I was younger, I didn't want to admit I had a serious disease. Because of my diabetes, I lost the sight in my left eye. Misconceptions continue to surround this monster public health issue. But the simple truth is, diabetes can often be prevented and complications avoided. You're not alone. Understand the realities of diabetes and know that you can manage it and lead a full, active life.
There's an alarming trend in the world today. Everywhere you go, people are saying that cinema is dead. But cinema is not dead. My name is Count Simon Gauntley, and on my television program, Count Gauntley's Horrors from the Public Domain, I make it my mission to resurrect forgotten film classics. I promise to dredge the sewers and ford the stagnant streams of film history to ensure that no film is truly lost to the ages. Count Gauntley and FPA, keeping cinema alive! Alive! Alive!
Well, even though Joseph's been gone 18 months, we've made the decision to keep all his things as they were when he was here last. I finally just packed his toothbrush away like 6 months ago. It had been sitting on the counter in the bathroom. And I was cleaning the bathroom one day and I just thought, okay, it's time to put the toothbrush in the medicine cabinet.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that! That's disgusting! Oh, poop already! You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait, look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Welcome back. We could continue talking about the depravity of Columbus, and I think that would only become self-serving. I think that if you get an inclination of what I was just talking about, and you want to do research, you can find out that he did far worse things.
Yeah. Like discover that the Earth is round.
Yes, there are these other myths around him. For instance, one of the things people like to attribute to him is that he discovered the world was round. The truth of the matter is that Columbus owned a copy of a chart of geography written about the height of the Roman Empire about 1,300 years before Christopher Columbus set sail. And it
So
showed...
there's no denying it.
Yeah, it showed that the world was round.
And Spain knew, so it wasn't news to them either.
It wasn't news to them either, yes. And the boats that he sailed to the New World on.
You mean the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria?
Or, actually as they were known, Santa Maria was known as the Galatian. The Nina is now believed to have a nickname for the Santa Clara, been called the Santa Clara, was its actual real name. The Pinta was also probably a nickname, though the real name of the ship isn't quite clear. Go ahead.
I've also heard that some of them did not make it back to Spain. Like one or two of them have sunk.
Yeah, one of them did wind up sinking, and they had to transport people onto one of the other ships. That is correct. So this idea that this was a fully successful venture was also a myth. Yeah. Now, during the 4 separate trips that he took, with the one starting in 1492, Columbus landed in various Caribbean islands that are now known as the Bahamas, and there's an island that we talked about is called Hispaniola. He also explored the Central and South American coastlines, but he never once in his entire life stepped foot on the continent of North America.
Yeah.
It's a complete and utter myth. And we go back to this idea of why do we celebrate something that is so patently false? And then we start asking the questions about religion.
Yeah, we just kind of started doing it and never stopped. Although, you know, I grew up in the local area in Prince George's County public school system, and you know, school holidays are not necessarily the same as federal holidays. But when I was a kid, I remember we got Columbus Day off. And then at some point, it just went away. I don't know if it was like when I was in high school or after I graduated. But now Prince George's does not celebrate Columbus Day. I think they do Yom Kippur instead of a Jewish holiday. I think it's New Year or a High Holy Day. You know, Montgomery County, you know, just to the north of that in Maryland, they swapped out celebrating Columbus Day for Eid al-Fitr, which is a result of, you know, changing demographics in the county, where a lot of Muslim students would be out of school that day to attend the mosque or other celebrations related to that holiday. And, you know, because there's so many students out of school, it makes sense to just like make it a no school day or a holiday. But maybe it's also like a Muslims lobbied the county. Who knows? But, you know, times change, you know, tastes change, purposes change.
Myths change.
Holidays can change. Columbus Day, people will talk about it being like an Indigenous Peoples Day, you know, kind of like to maybe this will make up for Columbus's atrocities. Probably not, though. But
Well, it's funny because it's like one of these things you're talking about getting it off as a school kid. And, you know, South Park did an episode recently where Cartman is quoted as saying, in 1492, Columbus gave us a day off of school. You know, and this is one of the things where we self-reinforce these myths.
It's like, if it benefits me, I don't want to get rid of it, you know. Right. I'm not even Catholic. Right. Are you Catholic?
Oh, I'm an atheist.
Yeah, exactly. So, but, you know, if you get off work or off school, as a result, you could care less about what it's called and just the fact that you got a day off.
Exactly.
Paid day off for some people.
Well, this is kind of like the Santa Claus myth. You know, I mean, you stop and you think about it. Okay, like as adults, we don't believe in Santa Claus. Kids do. Mm-hmm. But as a culture, we completely have this kind of myth, like we make movies about it. We buy Christmas trees, we buy commercial goods, and we go sit on a fat guy's lap at the shopping mall, you know. You stop and you think about the absurdity of all of this, mm-hmm. but it benefits us. We think of family, we think of good times, we think of, you know, we think of our childhood, we think of those smells that come, you know, from the turkey or ham or whatever it's baking in the oven. The myth in this case is reinforcing all of that.
Yeah.
In fact, the myth is what these things are organized around. So the myth is something I noticed too that's hard to attack because it isn't real. Mm-hmm. You know, if you could deconstruct something with facts and evidence, you know, it comes down much quicker. But if someone builds a myth in their own mind about things, they tend to rationalize things in an irrational way about an mm-hmm. irrational subject.
And I had a thought about, you know, how people are trying to swap Columbus Day out with Indigenous Peoples Day. You know, okay, Indigenous peoples, you know, there's an entire continent of North America. Columbus didn't kill them, though. So by stealing his holiday, if that's even what it is, it's kind of like they're assigning blame to this one person, kind of like how rather than blaming the population of Nazi Germany for the Holocaust, they're blaming just Hitler, you know. Mm-hmm. So it's true. Like he's a scapegoat, or, you know, everyone can focus their energy on this one character. And a lot of these scenarios is you've got hero worship or enemy targeting or whatever you want to call it, where it's simpler to tell these stories and get these ideas across by having one person to focus on.
And what's interesting is when we do Indigenous Peoples Day, and I think it's important to recognize the crimes that were committed against Indigenous people and what Columbus was, but there's already a bunch of mythology around Indigenous people. There's this kind of like, oh, these were these wise people who lived off the land and had a wisdom that was greater than our own.
In tune with nature.
In tune with nature. And
not violent amongst themselves at all.
And you know, the fact is, part of the reason that why they were so heavily decimated is they were making alliances with Spanish and other colonial powers to exterminate their enemy tribes. So there's a whole, you know, myth-based culture around that is completely out of line with reality. In fact, I know Native Americans who literally to this day, they don't even know these other tribes. They're almost non-existent, and they hate them. You know, it's like, oh, those are those those particular, you know, Native tribes. They're horrible human beings. It's like, so you're still fighting this mythological battle in your head because, you know, there's nobody left to fight.
Yeah.
So
someone else I wanted to touch on, Mansa Musa. Or Mansa the First of Mali. Up until like a year or two ago, I'd never heard of this person. Apparently, they're like, you know, Mali is a West African country, I believe, and sometime between the founding of Islam and today, there was this king, and he was like ridiculously wealthy, like Scrooge McDuck plus Uncle Pennybags combined. And you know, he was so rich, and he like owned slaves, and he like just like was walking around Africa and up along the coast and to the north and just dropping gold everywhere. And to me, I was like, I've never heard of this guy. He's obviously a Muslim character. Is this story real or not? And I'm not sure, but the research I've done into it, it was hard to find like any like solid information. So I'm like, I would say the jury's out on whether he's a real guy or not. But the story of him, it sounds similar to like that of Solomon, where like King Solomon is this Jewish character where, historians, legit historians, don't have proof that he actually existed. He's known to be like super rich and wise, and I think Musa is just like this Muslim character to promote like Islam amongst like maybe African American students. I don't know, but it's like today taught in some like social studies curriculum. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, and that's interesting because it shows that this isn't necessarily isolated to a particular country or continent. That this is part of how human beings as a whole digest myth information, and it's something that crosses all over the world. It's respective of things like religion, nationalism. We talk about things like, just with the age of the internet, we have things like memes now that are kind of permeating our society. These little quips. There's a photograph with this little statement in there, and all of a sudden this becomes a truth, and it spreads like wildfire. And a lot of these things just aren't true, and we've lost kind of this professionalism when it comes to disseminating information. I may not like certain press corps and things like that, but there's still things like journalistic standards of like printing retractions or noting who you're quoting or where you're getting this source information from. And I'm no fan of Donald Trump, but there's this meme that's been going around. It's been going around for a while, where it's a still image of Trump, which came from an Oprah Winfrey interview that he did, I believe, in the early '90s. And it said, if I was ever going to run for president, I would run as a Republican because they're idiots and will believe anything. This has absolutely no basis in truth. Yeah, this is a completely fabricated meme. You have people who are like, "Oh my God, this is so profound. This is what I've been saying for years." And
it plays into beliefs that they already hold.
Exactly.
A lot of people out there believe that the president thinks everyone's suckers, or
and I think
some big joke that he tricked people into voting for him.
And I think naively people think that them propagating that will somehow convince somebody who isn't already bought into it. So it's kind of like, that's really dangerous.
Yeah, and there's a purpose behind why they create these things. They're trying to change people's minds about political figures, or they use the authority of historically respectable people, like, say, a founding father of America, like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, or someone else like Albert Einstein, who is like scientifically respected. In the atheist community, I've seen plenty of memes where Albert Einstein is saying, I believe in God or something like that, and you look it up and it's like, where are they getting these quotes from?
Yeah.
Did he actually say that? Probably not.
Well, this is funny because prior to the show, I was telling you I used to work in an old folks home, volunteer there as a kid, and I ran into this really old guy, and they were like, "Do you know who that man is?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know who that old man is." And he used to ride with Jesse James' gang, and there's this myth built all around this old guy, and he's just sitting there chewing his tobacco, spitting in a tin at age 90 or whatever, and so everybody wants to believe this about this guy because they romanticize this idea, and I have no way of knowing whether this guy really was part of the Jesse James gang, nor do I really care if he was. And I'm thinking, in the age of the internet, all of that kind of crap's going to get exposed and blown away. But the age of the internet's created its own new set of myths that just don't seem to die.
Yeah, it's the whole double-edged sword metaphor where it's not a tool to fix everything. It's a tool that can be used for good or for evil.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that what we are as a species, we think that technology is going to like really, change us fundamentally as a species, and I don't really see it happening that much. I mean, it's like we're very stubborn about the way we are, and it's kind of amazing to me that something like the internet should, in theory, provide better and more accurate information faster than ever. But what happened is all these myth creators have jumped online and they start mimicking websites that look like they're authentic. Yeah. And so meme wars are definitely being used. And again, I go back to this thing where the person who's driving this meme is convinced they're changing world opinions. What they're actually really doing is they're antagonizing the other side. They're not really changing the other side's mentality.
And in some senses, it's like harder to track the origins of things. It's like now with the internet, because it's like you could find 100 sources that are all confirming the source, and then but they could all be wrong. It could just be that the internet is flooded with it being shared so many times and retweeted. Like the story I told about the Oxford College beams earlier. It's a story told by many different people, including Prime Minister of England, David Cameron. So I mean, I'm not even the first to call a president out on mistakenly citing a story as fact.
Yeah. One of the other people I wanted to talk about that when we get into this myth thing, because the Columbus is a little bit of a distant thing. It's one day. It's one guy who is even more ancient history than the guy we're about to talk about. Now, for me, it was Abraham Lincoln. There's a lot of myths around Abraham Lincoln, like, that he was a poor lawyer when it turns out he was a brilliant appeals lawyer. That he was chronically depressed. There's no actual information to suggest that. There's kind of like this tortured soul that went on to do, same thing with like Einstein. People kind of considered, he was a bumbling fool who had poor grades in school.
Yeah,
which is not
dropped
true.
Out of math. Is that true?
That's not true. In fact, there's a story behind that, because where he went to school to do math, he didn't speak their language well, and so part of it he wasn't able to do, but the school saw value in him and let him take courses that they knew he could do.
Props to that school.
Yeah. So, but with Abraham Lincoln, one of the biggest myths around him that I think affects us culturally, especially now we're seeing these battles going on over like Confederate monuments and flags and things, is that Abraham Lincoln he had a debate when he was running for a state senate where he said, I do not support the right of a Negro, to have the same rights as whites. He did say that he thought that black people had as people had a right to fight for their own self-determination, but he was clearly stated in these words that he was against emancipation. He was against that, and in fact, he only wrote the Emancipation Proclamation and brought it into law when he decided, along with the Union officers, that it would be a good tool to be used to destabilize the South. And in fact, a number of northern states where slavery was legal were exempt from this till the end of the Civil War. So, it's hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy. And even later in his life, he went on record as stating that he did not think blacks should have the same rights as whites. He thought they should have more rights than they did under slavery, but he didn't think that he said that he didn't believe in intermarriage. He didn't believe they should be able to sit on juries, and they should have no right to vote. And yet we call him the great emancipator. Like, how do you
people are like, Lincoln freed the slaves. It's like, define what you mean by freed.
Yeah.
And like, at what year and what caused it? It's like, it's been a gradual process where, okay, Civil War was won by the Union, and then Emancipation Proclamation, and then there's, Jim Crow laws, and indentured servitude, or
yeah, I mean,
many
you would
different
think
policies either implemented against Black Americans or ones that were supposed to be implemented that were poorly implemented or not implemented at all or uniformly across the United States.
That's correct. And when you read the Emancipation Proclamation and you read, what the law of the land said, basically when you create second-class citizens by telling them they can't drink from the same water fountains, you can't, use the same bathrooms, that you can't even live in the same part of town, you're basically instituting slavery by proxy in this situation. And the North did nothing about, people being lynched in the South. They did nothing. In fact, they didn't do much about people for about the first 40 years, by even Black people being lynched in the North. So,
And think about this, like Jim Crow laws. Who is this Jim Crow? Well, Jim Crow is like a caricature of African Americans, a very negative caricature, with like the red lips and extremely dark skin, and they're like stealing chickens or eating watermelons or something like that, or committing some crime or doing something that's like going to paint them in a negative and disrespectful light, which dehumanizes them in the same sense that, like, if you don't like someone and you want to like oppress them, you dehumanize them because it makes it easier. Because if everybody was treated like humans with basic human dignity, then you would have a cognitive dissonance, hopefully, inside you that tells you like, this just isn't right what we're doing. But it's propaganda. Jim Crow is propaganda. So like Jim Crow is like, I don't know if the laws were actually called Jim Crow laws, but or if that's just like let's label them as such. Because looking back on history and like these are laws that did not benefit African Americans, in fact oppressed them.
And the reasons that these laws were brought about were based off of myths about Black people. And,
stereotypes. And some of the stuff is like same stuff is said about like lots of different people, like Irish people, Italian people, Catholics, Muslims, atheists even, I'm sure atheists aren't the first like tribe to like eat babies.
Yeah, to give you the name, the concept Jim Crow law and how it's based in myth. Okay, Jim Crow's often been attributed to Jim Crow, a song and dance character of blacks performed by a white actor, Thomas D. Rice, in blackface. So I mean, even the motivation for the law is based off of some racist myth, that was reinforced by entertainment culture of the time. So yeah, you can definitely see. And what's really sad to me is that, like, especially in today's world, we have evidence, we have facts, we have the ability to research, to validate things, to substantiate things. Like, for instance, we see myth culture based around vaccination scares. The evidence is solid. It's rock solid. The evidence that vaccinations save lives. They do not cause autism. And yet there's a whole industry, a subculture out there that profits off of this fear. Where does this fear come from? It comes from this fear of another forcing you to put something in your body.
It sounds nefarious.
It sounds nefarious. People's lack of trust.
But I mean, it's not a completely unfounded fear in that governments, including our own, have been known to do things that were nefarious, or they've, like in Tuskegee, they did the infecting African American males with what is it?
Oh, syphilis.
Syphilis, yeah. Government makes mistakes sometimes. They hurt the environment by like spraying DDT everywhere.
Well, we gave our soldiers LSD.
Yeah.
We would have them go out to ground zero for testing sites and pick up radiation doses. They put them in trenches to see how close they could get them before they started getting sick. All those things are substantiated and true. And this comes back to, I think Michael Shermer talked about this in one of his discussions about, like type A mistakes and type B mistakes. One mistake actually gets you killed. Is that are those reeds in the wild for the primitive man? Is that wind blowing, or is there a tiger moving back there? Well, if you make the type A mistake and it's just the wind blowing, but you're cautioned and back away, nothing bad happens to you.
Right.
If it's type 2 mistake and it turns out a tiger, you're not around to make a type A mistake. So I think as a species, we are tendent to make bad good decisions.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like, you know, we will buy into something that isn't true and real just to be on the safe side.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no harm from the position that we're still alive.
Yeah, you could be superstitious and it could save your life, but you'd be like wrong.
Exactly. You could be wrong for the reason why you're alive.
Like if you think like peanuts are the devil's legume and you don't eat them for that reason, it might save your life because you have like a peanut allergy that you didn't know about, that you never got tested for. I don't know.
Yeah, and then your cousin eats peanuts and he happens to have a natural allergy to them and dies, and you're like, you see, I told you, it was all Satan's work.
Confirmation bias.
Confirmation
but,
bias. No causation correlation, but you know, whatever.
Yeah. Today is November 5th, aka Guy Fawkes Day. Remember the 5th of November?
Yep.
Popularized by the graphic novel and film V for Vendetta. So like this Guy Fawkes guy, basically he was involved in like a plot to blow up Parliament, I believe, in England. I don't know if he was real or everything.
He was real.
Oh,
they actually have his signature. Guido, his real name was Guido Fawkes.
Okay.
And he was part of a conspiracy of, I think it was like 5 individuals, and they had put...
He made the mistake of getting caught.
Yes, he did. They put massive amounts of kegs of gunpowder under British Parliament, these chambers underneath that they would use to store various things. And his job was to rig, I believe it was like a flintlock pistol, and was supposed to discharge it into one of these barrels of gunpowder, and there was enough that would have blown the Parliament up. And there was a malfunction. He was trapped, he was caught, he tried to set this off and it didn't work, and he was captured. And for a fairly good amount of time, I want to say about a month, he was tortured because they wanted him to give up the names of his co-conspirators and whatnot. And I forget who it was, but someone wrote something, I think it was even the king at the time said, because he personally,
was trying to kill him?
Well, no, he personally interrogated Guy Fawkes. And Guy Fawkes basically said, well, we hate you. You've repressed the Catholics, and if I could kill you, I would kill you, and I'm not apologetic about it. And he actually wrote that he had great respect for Guy Fawkes because he was not a coward. He did not do what they wanted, tell him what, I think eventually he did tell him some stuff because he had been so tortured. And he said that Guy Fawkes was the only man that he ever met that entered the British Parliament with honorable intentions. And that is actually a true statement. That's one of the rare things. But this is kind of how the myth got started, that Guy Fawkes was this great fighter for freedom. And the truth of the matter is the Catholic Church was every bit as repressive as England was.
But also, to be fair, I guess, to the Catholic Church, they were being oppressed by the Anglican Church in England too.
This is true.
It was a power struggle because Catholic Church in Europe at the time was like an extension of the Roman Empire. So Catholic Church no longer has influence over the kings and other leaders.
Sure.
Then that means the Roman Empire doesn't either.
Guy Fawkes is a simple working class guy. And for him to identify with an institution that used to burn people at the stake,
it's irony.
It's irony, and because he himself had bought into the myths of the Catholic Church.
It's ironic that the Catholic Church has made him to be like a martyr figure in that he was tortured, he stood for Catholic values, he was fighting for Catholicism in England against the oppressive Protestant king.
Well, and to show how pervasive myth can become in a culture, and how we talked earlier about how Columbus Day is now being sold as Native American Appreciation Days. In England, he is hailed as a hero. They do this thing where they burn his effigy every year, and but they don't do it in hate. They do it in admiration. And they even made a movie called V for Vendetta, where a British actor is playing him, and he's a great liberator fighting against the evil state that represses people.
It's a bit like Big Brother in 1984.
Yeah,
it goes right along with all those. What's the word? Dystopian futures.
Yeah, yeah, and this makes me go right into the issue of Christ. It's like, if there was even a real figure called Jesus Christ, he would bear very little, if any, resemblance to the historical. Historically, he would to the figure that we hear about, in church. There's very little evidence this person ever existed.
Yeah. And one of the things that raises a red flag with me when I hear stories like with the beams at the Oxford College or any of these things, it makes me wonder wait, how do they know all the information? If the story, it's really old and there's too much information and detail, and how do they get all that information? Especially when it's quotes, what are their sources? How do we know they're reliable? There's plenty of historians that wrote about people, even met these people that they're quoting, but usually when you're writing back then, it's to make $1 or a farthing or whatever they're called back then.
Well, if you're doing historical, if you're trying to do some type of historical research, the advice I would give someone is to stay away from quotes, because you have no. Someone could say something and you could quote them, but you don't know whether that was really a life experience they had, and if so, how it was skewed. What I'm more interested in...
Horses can lie, even if you get it from the horse's mouth.
Exactly. Or the horse can be mistaken.
Yeah.
Maybe the horse wasn't there. Maybe the horse has a conviction about something. It's sure of something, but it doesn't really know.
Nothing is true.
Nothing is true. But
everything is permissible.
Where I would take... where I would pay attention to old historical literature is someone's journals, or where someone was traveling and met people or had experiences, or you talk about these beams. I would like to know did the people who was the architect, and did they go on to do other architecture in the area? You can glean a lot of useful information by other examples of people's works. It kind of confirms people are pretty consistent. Going to that, people tend not to, in their personal journals, they don't really tend to lie, because they're not in a personal journal. They're not selling that to anyone.
Or a letter to somebody else.
Exactly, like a close family member or something like that.
Yeah, or if they're discussing it's just facts rather than it's oh, I did this on this day, but there's no fanciful details. And a lot of these characters, they're written about by people who are recognized to be historical romanticism authors, like William Blake, or there's this other guy who wrote about Napoleon, and there's various different people who wrote about these figures in different lights. Some of them are trying to write a good story that people will read and pay money to buy and read, and others are just doing it simply for scholarly academic pursuits, which they're probably being paid too. But.
Well, it's funny you mention this, because there's a film called Enemy at the Gates. This is a propaganda film, not propaganda film, it's a Hollywood film.
I was too young to recognize it as a propaganda film when I saw it, probably.
Okay, and basically it has Jude Law in it. And it's about a battle in Stalingrad between the Russian sniper Zuganov and a German sniper, Colonel Koenig. And it's like a duel that these two had, where they were going after each other.
Like a chess game.
It's like a chess game, exactly. And there's this scene in the beginning of the movie. First of all, he was this poor shepherd's son who learned to shoot because he was living in the wild, and And he shows up at the beginning of this movie as this unknown soldier, and he crosses the Danube River, and it's in flames, and the German dive bombers are just cutting people in half right and left, and the whole city's on fire. And he goes on to have this duel. He raises through the ranks and has this duel and kills this German officer, and almost wins the whole Second World War by himself, right?
Yeah, it's very Rambo-esque. Yeah, and that reminds me, or go ahead.
I have a friend of mine who was given, who was a big gun collector, and was given the rights by Zhigany Zhaganov's wife to translate his diaries, and was going to write a book. And we're going through this book. Of course, I can't read Russian, but he's explaining this. He was already well known as a sniper because he had served in the Navy prior to World War II and was known as a world-class shot in there. So when he enlisted in the Army or was drafted into the Army, he was already a first-class sniper and was brought in as a sniper. He crossed the Danube River and wrote in his entry that they crossed it with no incident or something like that. It was like basically there was nothing going on that day. No reference of him even mentioning Koenig, other than that he was aware that this guy was in the theater of operation. There's no discussion whatsoever about challenging this guy, being involved. They don't actually know how Koenig or who shot Koenig.
Well, the film, I'm sure, is a dramatization. And that reminds me of the film American Sniper, more recently, where the American Sniper guy, it's this movie, it's very, here's this one soldier who is like winning the war, and he's amazing, and he's got like a large body count, and he's like, super effective, and kind of like something that every, Marine or soldier
18-year-old boy.
Yeah. It's like, turns out like he was a compulsive liar, making up all these stories. Didn't he like make up the fact that he had
he said that he got into a fight with
something?
Jesse Ventura and kicked his ass, and Jesse Ventura sued him and proved in court that was all made up. And
was it libel or slander?
Slander. And on the other side of this, though, and this goes back to show how myths serve broad interest, because he was a recruitment.
He was a recruitment tool. He was a tool. He was a success
for the Army recruiters. I mean, there's this commercial, the advertisement. He's on his phone with his wife. I love you, baby, from the battle zone, and this is stuff that young men get in their mind, about romance, and and the whole romantic notion of war. But on the other side of this, there was a real sniper on the Iraqi side named Juba, and Juba filmed about 150 kills of American soldiers. So this is not an endorsement.
I'm sure he's on a short list.
Well, my point is, the guy didn't lie. He set up a camera and he filmed shooting American soldiers about 150 times.
And that becomes its own propaganda film for
that's eradicated in our society. That won't you cannot discuss that in our country. So it's the battle of the myths,
Yeah.
So it's like, we want this image to be seen this way, and we will create this myth-based reality around it.
We're righteous, and our bullets are guided by the hand of God.
There you go. Amen. Hallelujah. Heil Hitler, or whatever, So,
Heil Hydra.
Yeah. So let's talk. We only got a few minutes left, but I want to talk about Martin Luther real quick.
Oh yeah.
Because I believe we just celebrated the 500th year anniversary of the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah. Halloween.
Yes. Halloween.
Or 500th anniversary of his posting of 95 Theses, which I'm not even sure if they're actually, what do they mean by theses? Because I was like browsing through the list, and to me it looked like it was really just like 95 sentences, or like 95 in the sense that you've got the Bible and you've got it split up into verse 1, 2 through 95 or whatever. And I think it's like that. And really the general premise of it is he's like I can't stand that they've got the Catholic Church has indulgences, and just like, I was thinking about it a few days before Halloween, hearing news stories about it, and I was like, if this is true, it's like the nerdiest thing in history ever. This guy was like so upset with the Catholic Church that he like took the time to write down 95 different issues he had with the Catholic Church, and then go and pin it on a church door, expecting that people were actually going to care and read it and not just like tear it down. Like, how could that actually be true? Because if I was like a priest and I saw something that didn't belong on a door, I would have ripped it off if I was a Catholic priest.
Yeah,
so like, did it happen?
Well,
turns out it didn't.
Well, yeah, it didn't. There is a discussion about a janitor gluing them to the door. So I think someone inside the church shared a sentiment, and but he did not go out in broad daylight and do this where he could have been attacked by a mob. It was done apparently surreptitiously. I believe it was by the janitor of the church, and as I recall, it was done with glue, not nails. It's kind of like someone takes your propaganda that agrees with it and uses their position to propagate it. But that's not the same thing as him going up and nailing it to a door.
But it's also like it as a story is like a foundation myth of the Lutheran Church, which is now the national church of multiple European countries.
Imagine that.
Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, I think.
Imagine a church being based off of a myth. What are the odds?
Exactly. It's a non-Jesus myth too.
Turns out he didn't translate. He didn't translate his work into German. That was done by another person. I think he did it, as we discussed, in Latin. But someone else did the actual translation. He was also not a simple monk. He was actually quite well educated in their schools of theology. So we got about a minute left. And, I just want to say that everything you watched here today is based on a myth. We're not real.
Yeah.
The show isn't real. Don't trust us. Hell.
Yeah, do your own research.
Do your own research, man.
Especially on vaccines.
Hey, man, if L. Ron Hubbard can come up with a cult like Scientology and have people still buying in it in this day and age, we're screwed.
Yep.
Let's just go ahead and have AI. We talked about AI last week, and we have AI take over. It can't possibly do a worse job than we did.
Yeah. Saudi Arabia actually granted citizenship to the first robot AI.
We talked about that. It's now collecting royalties too.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what a computer's going to do with money, but whatever.
Is it male or female?
They female. It actually has more rights than women in Saudi Arabia. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. All right, y'all have a great week. See you next week.
Peace out.
Yay.